What's up? Evening Owl, soaring in. Happy Native American Heritage Month. The final topic in this series. Drum roll please, EO. Assimilation and how it contributes to the death of culture. It's wild that Thanksgiving is deemed an innocent holiday when its origins were much more violent. I've touched on this topic in the 3 other videos of the NAHM playlist. This one is diving deep into the whole of assimilation, genocide, and ways we have found to reconnect with our culture. There is one mention of sexual abuse. It's not detailed, but that sentence will have a time code to be skipped if needed. This video is going to be more serious than the other ones as I cannot bring myself to joke about some of these topics. Disclaimer, I do not speak for all Native people. Native people are not one unit. I shouldn't have to say this. Everyone has a right to their opinions, even if they're wrong. Assimilation is essentially whitewashing Indigenous people to Eurocentric standards. Learning to read, write, and speak English. Buddy-o, I hear you say. Aren't those helpful skills in living in society today? Well, yeah, white society. Language is very personal to each tribe and each culture, and if that tribe and love of culture is punished, you kill the Indian and save the man, which I find more cruel than killing us. Those Indigenous are not just gone, their memories are forgotten. They knew who they once were, and it was starved out of them. Children were taken away from their families and land. If their families refused to let them go, they would be incarcerated and their children were put into the boarding schools anyway. They forced these children to change their clothes, cut their hair, and change their lifestyle. This, as you can imagine, is extremely traumatic for children, no matter the age. They were taken away from everyone and everything they knew and loved. They were forced to be in horrible conditions with militaristic scheduling and treatment. No child deserves that, especially when children already have very little power when it comes to their rules in everyday life. There were more terrifying situations than kidnapping children and forcing them to act a certain way. These Indigenous children were scrutinized for speaking the only language they knew before then. They were physically, mentally, and sexually abused for practicing Native rituals and speaking their native language. These children had all agency taken from them, along with their community. One punishment for speaking their language was to be put in a jail cell in a dark, dank basement and were only given bread and water for sustenance. They were forced to forget their mother's language because white men were too weak and cowardly to coexist. They were forced to put their religion in a box and bury it, or they would be the ones who were buried. Many children were. Over 900 children were buried in mass graves in boarding schools. There is nothing civilized about the way white settlers handled things. The way they destroyed the land when planting their roots, or had their roots planted for them, I should say. They destroyed the land by polluting it with their advanced technology, by outlawing native practices that had been in place for millennia. And let's not forget disrupting the delicate ecosystems. You can see it with the carbon emissions, with the oil they built the modern world on. The one thing I see that was more advanced than the many tribes who looked after this earth is their sense of self-importance. With the white man's ego in mind, let's talk about how they almost completely wiped out buffalo. Buffalo represents not only one of the main food sources of the Sioux, Crow, and Cheyenne tribes, but the wastefulness of colonizers. There were entire hunting parties, supplied and sponsored by the military. Wow, the US and its need for power is the reason why people are starving. Shit has definitely changed. Back to buffalo. When killing buffalo, these hunting parties' main goals weren't the leather or the meat. It was leaving them to rot so Indigenous people couldn't eat or use any of the buffalo. Which, I mean, taking over the entire fucking continent wasn't enough. Nah, disrespecting and killing the people who literally saved your ass your first winter here wasn't enough. You had to starve them because your milita was incompetent. And they were seen as heroes for shooting buffaloes with guns. They didn't even make their own weapons. Losers. Talking about losers, let's not mention the name of the guy who made a letter that eventually became law. Laws that made Indigenous practices illegal, with punishments such as forced isolation and starvation. It wasn't until 1978, with the Indigenous Religious Freedom Act, that Indigenous people could practice their religion freely, almost a century after assimilation had been put into place. The damage is already done, and seeps into many reservations and ancestral lines today. It's evident in me. I don't know the language my ancestors spoke. Don't take care of the lands like my ancestors did, and I don't have the community they did. It's hard to feel connected to my heritage when my existence is an antithesis to it. But to get back to my ancestors' homeland, I would have to purchase it, which is an inherent slap in the face to Native values. They tell us to play nice and we'll get rewarded, and if we don't, history has already spelled that out. Even when treaties are signed, they're broken. Look at the KXL pipeline court case, or the DAPL pipeline that is set to be put down. If put down, when it leaks, it will poison the Mississippi River, the only water source for the Sioux tribe. Which is so fucking bonkers because that means the KXL case was essential for the US to put their oil lines down instead of Canada's. The US government is still violating treaties, still trying to starve indigenous people of resources, and still disrespecting ancestral lands and borders they put into place. It is always the same thing in different fonts. It is always about genocide and the disregard for Native lives. Let's transition into a lighter topic. Younger Natives see the history, they feel it, and they don't let it win. Natives old and new are reconnecting and helping others reconnect with their heritage. One good thing that comes from all this horrid history is evidence on how strong we are, how we refuse to accept the way things are, and make them into things they were. Waylon Peona is helping his fellow natives live a healthier lifestyle while giving life to his culture. More indigenous people are learning their language, practicing their religion freely, practicing their medicinal practices freely, being who they are freely. They are rebuilding everything the U.S. has tried to demolish for over a century. The lives that the U.S. has taken will never be replaced. But hopefully, they can smile upon their ancestors, using the same practices that they did, and guide them along the way. The acts committed against indigenous people are horrendous, and go deeper than history classes always led us to believe. No amount of reparations will ever make things right, especially when treaties are disregarded for power, wealth, and land. No amount of fake apologies will be enough when the same thing happens time and time again. Genocide lines the pathway for American history, creating its own red carpet. But there will always be those who decide to walk a different path, the same ones their ancestors did, the ones who refuse to believe the lies, the ones who believe their community over a political state that benefits from their death. We are stronger together, which is why they tried to rip us apart. And that is the end of the Native American Heritage Month series, as of right now. Once again, the full script will be linked in a doc below with clickable sources. If I were to recommend a read, it would be Building a Hopeful Future on nativehope.org. Thank you so much for making it to the end. These subjects were unsurprising, I would say. I've always known I was Cherokee, but very removed from the culture itself. I could say I was colonized by my mother, but assimilation hit our family generations back. I also lived with the knowledge that only 2% of all Native people were left, and yet we prevail. Some of us may be a tad polluted with colonizer blood, but it's the spirit that counts. Native is Native, and if we spend our time fighting each other, we forget to fight the real issues. Thanks for stopping by. You feathers help me fly.